There are many stories in the Bible, and this one I'm going to talk to you about is Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and in this dream, he got very troubled. He was in his second year of reigning when he had a dream, and he was the king of Babylon, and it upset him a great deal, and he woke up. It was like a nightmare. He then called the magicians, the astrologers, and the sorcerers, as well as some smart Jews to show him his dream. To start the story off correctly, I must tell about some Jews. There were 4 men by the name of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These Jewish men found favor of God, and they were given knowledge as well as skill in the learning and wisdom of God. God also gave Daniel, especially, understanding of visions and dreams. So it kind of prepared him for the king's dream that he had, the nightmare. As I said before, it was the second year of Nebuchadnezzar when he had his nightmare. Then the king wanted all the magical men and the Jewish foremen to come into him. When he had previously inquired of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the king found them 10 times smarter than all the magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers in the realm. But to test them, Nebuchadnezzar did not tell them his dream. He told them they needed to say what the dream was, as well as interpret it. The magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers argued and wanted the king to tell them the dream, and then they would interpret it. But the king said, "No. If you can tell me the dream, I will know that you are telling the truth. And if you cannot tell me, then I will know that you are not telling the truth and do not have the correct interpretation." Daniel also had a dream, and God explained what the king's dream was. He told his faithful friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of the secret of the vision. He told them to keep it secret, and they promised. Daniel said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you, God, and praise you, God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what we desired of you, and by making known the king's matter." Daniel then asked to go into the king alone, and the king allowed it. He interpreted the dream, but before he did, he told the king there were not any wise men, no magicians, no astrologers, no soothsayers or sorcerers who could interpret the dream, but only the God of heaven could reveal secrets. Daniel told him that his dream meant this: "These things shall come to pass, O king, according to the dream. You have seen a statue, and this statue has a head of fine gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thigh of brass, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay." Daniel explained that the image referred to successive kingdoms. So these were the kingdoms that were going to come to pass in history. So historians have agreed that the statue of the head of fine gold is Babylon. So this was the king of Babylon. So this is it was during the head of gold time. Okay, and this was from 612 BC or before Christ to 530 BC. The breasts and the arms of silver were the Medes and the Persia from 539 BC or before Christ to 331 before Christ BC. The thighs of brass were Greece from 331 BC to 168 BC. The legs of iron were Rome from 168 BC to 476 AD. Now this would have been between the time, if you know that BC stands for before Christ and AD is after his death. So this would have been, the Rome time would have been during Jesus. Okay, so we just understand that in our timeline, because our timeline has a lot to do with this. Okay, and the feet of iron and clay were a divided kingdom of Western Europe that rose up after the fall of the Roman Empire, starting from 476 AD, or after death. So this is 476 years after the death of Christ. And this is when Rome fell. And in history, you can actually look that up and find out that it did fall. If you should like to see an image of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, you can search for it under images, as there are many diagrams to show it. So it might give you a chance to study it very closely. The king then promoted Daniel and his friends in his kingdom. He praised the God of heaven and the God of Daniel, but it didn't last long. Very soon, Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue of himself and wanted everyone to bow down and worship it. When the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music which sounded, if not, they would be thrown into the fiery furnace to be burnt up. So they had to make a choice. So Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to make a choice whether to bow down to the king's statue that he made of gold, or whether they were going to remain standing. And they didn't. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow down. The princes, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces told on them to the king. So can you imagine having all those people against you because you don't bow down to a golden image? So that's where they were, and that's what was the problem here. So the king was angry, and he gave Daniel and his friends one more chance to bow down. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego told the king that they would not bow down, and that their God could deliver from the fiery furnace. The king no longer liked Daniel and his friends, because they would not worship him. The king had forgotten about the God of heaven. He just wanted to be the big shot. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tossed in the fiery furnace, but the flames did not hurt them. Interestingly, the king saw a fourth person in the fire, and the king thought it looked like the Son of God. It's interesting that he's seen something in there, and yet it didn't really change him. He's seen these men come out, weren't even singed a bit. And the men that put him in there, they were big men, the biggest men they could get, to put him in the fire, and they were burned. And yet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not burn. and the king seen someone that looked like the Son of God. It's interesting, this is in the Old Testament, and the Son of God had not really materialized to a lot of people, but the king knew who it was. So that's kind of interesting. Later on, he said it might have been an angel. He wasn't sure. The king repented somewhat of his actions and acknowledged the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and made a decree that all could serve these men's God. So he did get scared enough, and seeing that their God saved them, so he allowed his kingdom to worship their God, the living God. However, King Nebuchadnezzar had all the right words, but his heart wasn't right. It seemed like the king had so many nudges and situations to get to know the God of heaven, but he soon forgot as he puffed himself up again and again. God was merciful to him over and over, even though the king had to go through some very difficult things to become humble. Ultimately, God gave him another nightmare, which Daniel interpreted for him. But the consequences of the king's actions was not as good as before with this dream. We will leave that for another video called Nebuchadnezzar's Illness, and that is another dream he had, and something happened in that. So that's your next video, and hopefully that will make you come back for one more. Hope you enjoyed that story. Just wanted to say something about this story a little bit too before I get off the video. Is Nebuchadnezzar's pride was his sin.